No, this is not any kind of a joke. I really do mean that all guitar players would be way better off if they spent a chunk of their practice time playing and practicing completely naked in the most literal sense of the word. And the sooner you start practicing guitar naked the way I'm going to teach you in this video, the sooner you will end up with way better guitar technique and probably even more speed as well, but you also have tighter and cleaner two-hand synchronization, better ability to control excessive muscle tension throughout your body, and believe it or not, even a better ear. Now, for best results, it's really important that you practice guitar naked in front of a mirror. The bigger the mirror, the better, so you can really see all the little details. And then if you want to go all out, I suggest you even film yourself practicing naked so you can later watch your recordings of naked practicing and you can pause and freeze frame certain moments you really want to see in full detail, or if you want to rewind certain things and watch them again for more clarity, you can do that as well. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. When I was a teenager, I used to play and practice guitar naked all the time, for hours at a time in fact. And hey, look at me now. I think it worked out pretty well. Now at this point, I'm thinking I should probably clarify exactly what I mean by playing and practicing guitar naked before your imagination starts to run too wild and you start getting too many wrong ideas. Playing guitar naked is actually really simple. There's only one thing you need to do. What you do is you pick up your guitar and you go like this. Boom. Now you're playing guitar completely naked. There's nothing covering up your two-hand synchronization inconsistencies or articulation mistakes. Everything is exposed to the world and is just hanging out. And when you're practicing guitar naked like this, there are 5 really effective ways you can use this to your advantage to make your technique improve a lot faster. The first thing you can do is to simply become aware of any inconsistencies or weaknesses overall in your pick attack and articulation. Now normally when you play through an amp, the amp is going to balance out any type of inconsistencies to the point where you don't really notice them. But when you unplug your guitar and your articulation weaknesses are exposed, they become very easy to spot. So the first time you play even a simple scale without an amp, you may be in for a nasty surprise and you'll notice that your articulation will maybe get weaker as you go from the thicker strings to the thinner strings, or when you go from ascending to descending, or vice versa. Like this, for example. Now, most people would never become aware of this. They would just practice like this all the time with the amp on or even with the amp off. They just never pay attention to this, and they think that's normal. But then they notice the moment they begin to push their speed up, their hands get out of sync and they don't know why. Well, this right there is a big reason why that happens. When you're practicing guitar unplugged, you want to make sure that your absolute ability of hitting the notes as hard as possible increases. Just like you want your speed to increase, you want your articulation to increase as well, and you want your articulation to be consistent on every note. You want to articulate all the notes with about the same level of volume and articulation clarity from one repetition of a lick to another. Like this, for example. Notice how the volume of the notes was pretty high, and also the articulation consistency didn't really change at any point during the scale. One surprising benefit of focusing both on your articulation power and consistency is it forces your hands to get in tighter sync, because it's literally impossible to pick the notes with almost string-breaking force like this and have your hands be out of sync. So practice with this focus in mind. It'll help your technique a lot. Now, I mentioned at the start of this video that practicing guitar the way I'm going to show you here is going to improve your ear as well as your technique. Well, here's what I mean by that. To state the obvious, when you're playing without an amp, it's hard to hear what you're playing. And even when you're doing your best to hit the notes as hard as possible, it can still be hard to hear what you're playing. But when you know what you're doing when you practice, you can often channel that challenge and improve your ear in the process, so that when you turn the amp back on, you'll have an easier time catching all your mistakes. The way you do this is by bringing in our good friend called focus rotation that I talked about in my other videos on this channel. And then what you do is you choose a lick you're trying to practice, but instead of focusing on all of its notes at the same time, you use focus rotation to only focus on one note of the lick at a time. Say we got a repeating pattern like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the lick over and over, but I'm only going to look at and focus on the sound of this note right here that I'm fretting. If I make mistakes on any of the other notes, I'm not really going to care so much right now, because I am going to rotate my focus to each one of those other notes, and I am going to fix them when it's their turn. Observe. So after about maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute of that, I'm going to rotate my focus to, let's say, this note right here, this D note, 7th fret of the G string, and I'm going to continue repeating the lick over and over, so you're not going to hear or see anything different if you were to just watch me play, but my brain is now focused on a completely different note and is making sure that that note is being articulated correctly and the hands are in sync every time that note is played. Going through this process one note at a time on any lick you practice is going to do wonders for training your ear. And then when you turn your amp back on, on, turn your distortion back on, then your speed, your articulation, your clarity, your consistency are all going to go through the roof. Now, we talked about how practicing guitar without an amp improves your articulation and your synchronization at the same time, but there's a surprising guitar speed benefit hidden there as well. What I mean by that is anytime you improve your articulation power in the picking hand, your strength capacity in the picking hand has no choice but to increase also. So when you turn your amp and your distortion back on, you're now able to play with more ease at speeds that used to challenge you. And what do you think that means? It means you can now crank the metronome up a few more BPM. You'll be able to keep up just as easily, all thanks to a greater strength reserve in your picking hand. Now, a big caveat and warning here. As you're practicing unplugged and you're working on your articulation and pick attack, make sure to not start squeezing the notes harder with the fretting hand to try to match what the picking hand is doing. That's a big, big mistake. You want to keep the levels of tension in both hands independent of each other. As this hand picks harder, this should not squeeze harder. As this picks softer, you should not start fretting the notes softer. Each hand should be doing its own independent thing. The way you do that is slow down the metronome as necessary, or even turn the metronome off altogether and play without a metronome, and find the tempo where you can have that hand independence and then build from there. In my opinion, the supreme master of this hand independence stuff we're talking about is Paul Gilbert. And I've done a video on my channel breaking down Paul's hand independence ability and his technique in general, and you can watch that video after you finish with this one. But we are still not done with talking about the many articulation benefits to be had from practicing guitar unplugged. One thing you can also do is work on controlling the range of your dynamics. And this is different from simply pushing up the maximum power of your articulation to as high of a level as it'll go. What I mean by your range of dynamics is your ability to play a lick at the same steady tempo without changing the tempo, while varying how loudly and how softly you're picking the notes without changing anything in how hard you're squeezing the notes with the fretting hand. This is quite a bit harder to do than it sounds, especially when you do it unplugged, but hey, all the more reason to do it because it's going to improve your technique that much faster. Here's an example. Yeah, it's pretty difficult, but give it a shot. And one very surprising benefit to playing guitar without an amp is that it basically forces your fretting hand to use more efficient technique. Here's what I mean. When you play guitar with the amp on or with distortion on especially, it's pretty easy to get away with little inefficiencies like not fretting notes on the fingertips like you're supposed to do most of the time, and instead fret notes with the pad of the finger like you're not supposed to do, or let the knuckle collapse, which in most cases is also a pretty bad idea. But when you turn the amp off, you'll quickly realize just how much harder your fretting hand has to work in these inefficient positions just to produce a clear note. And that realization may force you to either fix your fretting hand technique right away, or at least ask some better questions to somebody who's more knowledgeable about this topic than you are, so then you can fix your fretting hand technique a little bit later in sort of a roundabout way. Either way, it's one more hidden gem of a benefit to pay off my original promise to you at the start of this video, how practicing guitar naked helps you improve your guitar playing in all kinds of ways. Now, as great as practicing guitar unplugged is, you don't want to be practicing that way all the time. You only want to spend maybe 20 to 40% of your overall practice time in this unplugged state. The rest of the time you want to play with amp, with distortion, whatever tone you use in your normal playing. The reason is you also want to get good at cleaning up sloppy string noise and notes bleeding together. And if you want to learn how to do that, I have a whole video tutorial covering that in great detail. You can watch it right here. And if you want more help with building your guitar speed, hit the link in the description of this video or go to the page on the screen right now. I'm going to show you a free 1-hour masterclass called Guitar Speed Formula. What it is a new way to build guitar speed without having to start slow and gradually build speed in small increments, because let's face it, that's a pretty boring way to practice, and more importantly, it doesn't work anywhere near as well as people tell you that it does. If you want to know a new way to build guitar speed, hit the link, enter your email address, I'll send you the video for free. If you like this video, hit the like button so YouTube spreads it out to more guitar players like you, and they'll benefit from it the same way you did. This is Mike Filipov, guitar practice expert from PracticeGuitarNow.com. I'll see you next time. This applause is for the people who clicked on this video expecting me to seriously do it with no clothes on, and for the people who clicked off of this video the moment they realized that's not what the video is going to be about. Although, I'm not really sure which one is more unnerving.